Hello friends, let us begin with the overhead expenses. Now what are overhead expenses? Overhead cost variance that can be defined as the difference between the standard cost allowed for the actual output achieved and the actual cost incurred. So basically, what is the variance? For example, if you want if you know that the overhead required for a particular kind of production is say for example 10,000 rupees, and how much you have actually incurred in that. If you have actually incurred 12,000 rupees, then there is actually a 2,000 rupees variance which is being produced in the actual cost. So my dear friends, that is nothing but the overhead variance. Now let us see the overhead. Actually, according to the terminology which is used in the cost accountancy, ICWA London, which has defined as the aggregate of the indirect material cost. According to the terminology, actually the cost accountancy, which the ICWA London has decided that the aggregate of the indirect material cost, indirect wages, and the indirect expenses. So this is actually the overhead. Overhead is what? Indirect material cost plus indirect wages, including the indirect labor cost plus the indirect expenses. So this is nothing but the overheads. So what are the overhead costs? Firstly, there is variable overhead, and secondly there is the fixed overhead. So what is variable overhead? Firstly, we have to recall the variable overhead that is allocated to product and services, that is using the budgeted variable overhead here. And so basically the overheads will change with the quantity or the amount that are variable overheads, and we have some fixed overheads that is allocated to the products. So it doesn't change actually the fixed rate or fixed overhead. So there are already budgeted fixed overhead rate, and which works over here are nothing but the fixed overheads. So my dear friends, here actually the graph which shows what is the difference between the variable overhead and the fixed overhead. Here the cost is being planned and controlled. Here in the variable overhead, you can see the volume. With the as the volume increases, the variable overhead increases. But with the volume, Assalamu alaikum. So there are actually the fixed fixed overheads, actually, which is it doesn't change with the volume. So here the volume remains the same, so it is fixed over here with the time. The price doesn't change. So this is nothing but that's kind of fixed overhead. And if how the costs are allocated to product, here how the cost is planned and controlled. Here planning is done and the control is done, but here the allocation is done. Here with the volume also it increases, so these are variable. But if the allocation is done already, for example you have to expense only 100, so with the volume the changes takes place. As the actual production grows, the fixed overheads also grow. So this is nothing but the figure which shows if no planning and controlling is done, if their costs are allocated to products, then the fixed overhead it grows like a variable manner, but it's already decided that how much you have to make the expenditure. So this is nothing but the concept of overhead cost variances. So basically now we have studied the overhead cost variances, and in the upcoming slides we are going to look the various formulas of it also, and how to calculate all these factors. In the upcoming slides we'll see each and every slide there is having different formulas for that. Thank you so much. Stay tuned.